Thanks for coming out again, guys. My name's Dennis Baker. I'm the Business Program Director. Thanks for people watching. Again, this is a reminder. We do these things to encourage you to create your own work as well as meet independent filmmakers that are there doing it. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Dennis. My name is Frank Hall Green. Thanks so much for coming to watch Wildlike. I really appreciate it. Thanks. Thank you.
So we're going to jump right into it.
Yeah.
Let's just talk a little bit about yourself, kind of your career path, how you got started, school, that kind of like just a little bit, kind of a synopsis, a little bit as much as.
Back in 1972.
Back in the day.
Yeah, I'm from Atlanta. I grew up kind of drawing and painting, being in the arts. At one point, I did some acting, and I went to NYU as an undergraduate, and not intending to be in film at all. But of course, it's a film. You can't go to NYU without feeling like there's film going on here. And I actually took photography, and I kind of landed into being a photo major, and took some film, some cinema studies, and then I went back to Atlanta, and I got involved in business and in the startup world, and which ended up being really instrumental to how I got back into film. But I just missed the arts, and I wanted to get back into doing something creative in some way. But I didn't want to just go out and say, oh, I'm going to be a painter. I just felt like that was just a black hole, you know. It's like trying to be a director today. So I decided to apply to go back to school, and it dawned on me that I could go to film school and I could do, arts and some business still, and I could, if I got bored with one project, I could move to another one, and had all these dreams of what it could be. And I got into the NYU grad film program. I knew some people there just from being there an undergraduate, and that sort of launched me on a trajectory. When I got there, I actually started doing a lot of producing because a lot of the people there are really focused heavily on directing or cinematography or writing or all of the above, and they need classmates to produce their movies, and someone that's not afraid of numbers and things like that. And so I ended up falling into that role a lot and started doing that work, and I still do it now, but along the way, I was making short films as a director and a writer, and eventually had my eye on making Wildlike as a first feature, and that's sort of, the short version.
Yeah, that's great. It sounded like you had this story maybe percolating for a while. Kind of talk a little bit about how.
I did. I mean, I'm a big backpacker. I'm an avid backpacker myself, and I'm a lover of outdoors, so I think inherently I wanted to tell a story that was going to take place in nature and have something to do with the way that a natural environment might play on characters. And ever since I was little, I think I always had sort of journeys and adventure and like going out and those sorts of trajectory type stories in mind is really my favorite type of story. So that was there also. And then for the social issue, for the sexual abuse component, I'd known that I wanted to do a movie that would have a message, that would carry something forward and give it some gravitas. And I'd just been percolating around the idea of tackling the sexual abuse topic actually for a long time, since even before film. I just felt like I knew people that had shared intimate stories with me, kind of opened my eyes. Now I look back and I realize I opened my eyes as a male looking on a female experience, which I didn't understand how powerful of experience it was for young women and adult women, and it just became more and more of an issue. And so by the time Wildlike came around, I sort of knew that was what I was going to tackle, and I also felt like it had been done in a really sort of generic and stereotypical way in a lot of films and on TV, and I wanted to see if I could maybe capture it in a non-after-school special type way, and that was a fear, can I really pull it off in a way that may be a little bit truer to what the real experience is, at least as I had heard it and researched it.
So can you talk about that process of kind of putting pen to paper? Maybe did you start with a kind of treatment? It sounds like you had a lot of stuff in your head. Mm-hmm. How did you start getting it on the paper?
I tend to not be short on ideas. It's more about, the follow through and getting around to doing the work. So I have a method I've been using for a while, and that is that, an idea or something will pop into my head, and, like with Wildlike, I think it started with, the idea of this young girl could follow this. It actually was going to be two kids could follow this, older character, into the outdoors, and as long as they wouldn't give up or turn around, there'd be nothing he could really do about it. And so I wrote that in an email, just sort of a couple of sentences, and I emailed myself. And then a couple of days later, I'm sitting on the subway, and I open up the email, and then something dawns on me, and I'll write it in, and I'll re-email back to myself, and that will start, this chain of notes to myself that grows and grows by week. And I think in Wildlike's case, I graduated from NYU grad film in 2008. I think I was just starting to do notes on it then, and I didn't have a full draft until 2010. So I was probably bouncing around notes and maybe writing some short scenes in that email for literally over, maybe a year to 2 years. And so it becomes really, really long. And then at some point, I just cut and paste the whole thing into a big Word document, and I try to just kind of sort it out into an outline and make it a little bit more. This isn't at all the Robert McKee version or anything. I've had other workbooks and obviously classes and whatnot, but I just find for me what's important is just get the stuff down on paper, just get all your ideas out there. I think visually, and I think about what excites me creatively and what I'm passionate about, and I just want to get those things down, and then I'll worry about structure later. Yeah. And I think, and then I had a friend, and I kind of put it all together. I said, here's the sort of outlines of a story, and he helped me by being a sounding board and saying okay, I think this could work in Act 2, or I don't think this is working, and and then eventually I just started writing scenes, and it became a screenplay. And I still work that way today. It's the same way.
Nice. And then the process of making it into a script form, because you kind of had the emails and creating that, kind of talk a little bit about the process. Was it all shorter time? Was it something that was in chunks? Kind of talk about that.
So, I take it into a Word document, and then I make a table, which is a great way, I think, to make a structured outline, or a step outline, I guess is what you would call it. I never really write synopses or anything like that, because I feel like when I write a synopsis, things start to get really general and generic. And if I just wrote down, young girl follows cantankerous old guy who doesn't want to help her, and then he relents and does, it's like we've seen that story before. And that's, that's the challenge, is getting away from that story. So I want to be specific about what it is that excites me, or what I can put on the screen that maybe people haven't seen before. And so I feel like the step outline allows you could write a little piece of dialogue or anything that represents a scene or a story beat or an important moment in the movie, like the point when she loses her shit in the car, when she gets so upset. It was really important to me that there was this heightened moment in that scene where she just was exasperated and expressed that in front of him. And I think I wrote down she screams and has a fit, and that, so that became sort of that moment. Anyway, and once that outline is done, then I do open final draft, and I start saying, okay, here's the first step, and I try to write out scenes, sometimes cutting and pasting from the step outline.
How long did it take you to write this one?
It doesn't take me long to do a rough draft because I've done so much work ahead of time. I think maybe the rough draft, just like a solid 3 or 4 days just to get the first draft on the page.
And then do you have kind of, like you said, your one friend, do you have kind of a trusted group that then they can read that draft? Or how does that process?
In this case, I didn't have a group. I had one person, I think just because it was working well. Once I had 2 or 3 drafts, or maybe it was in the 4 or 5 drafts, I had a couple of people read it. I think for me with writing, and I'm sure this happens with a lot of other people, you get to this tricky place where you sort of get everything you want on the page, you get this story out, you have a structure, and then you don't know where to go with it. It's not necessarily working, and it needs work, but that, I think, as someone that owns the material, it's hard to think, I should just change Act 3 entirely, or at least it's hard for me. I've become in love with characters and moments, and I'm not really thinking about Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and what's driving the story from the beginning, and where's it, I'm thinking about what do I want to see scene to scene. And fortunately with Wildlike, because it sort of plods along, it ends up allowing for that structure pretty well. But that's where someone else comes in handy and says, look, this really isn't working. And then once you start sharing with a second person or a third person or fourth person, and you're hearing the same thing, yeah, then you either learn your lesson or you learn your lesson in the editing room.
Roughly, kind of what draft did you land on your final version?
I think, we were redrafting a little bit through the shoot, but I think it was 17.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I mean, in some, some drafts are minor changes. You're just going
course.
through and then changing a dialogue, and then some are a little bit more major. But the story was largely the way it is here. The structure didn't change too much. This one.
Give us a little bit of timeline. How did you kind of know, okay, we're ready to move kind of into pre-production? When was it that moment for you, like, okay, I got something here that's ready to kind of move forward and has legs? Because that's a big decision.
Yeah, I think, as I said, I produced a ton of shorts, and then I was doing some line producing. I line produced 3 or 4 low-budget features, and that allowed me to sort of see, okay, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, this is what this might cost, and so I had those ideas in mind. So actually, while I was writing the script, I was kind of anxious to sort of start budgeting out and just sort of writing down. And you don't actually have to be a line producer to do this. You just start writing down, like, what might it all cost? Just, write it all down and sort of adding things up together. And by that time, I knew that I wanted to do it in Alaska, and and quickly found out that there was a huge tax credit there, so that was a big help. And so by the time I had probably in the 4th or 5th draft, I really wanted to find some producing partners to help sort of build the team. My theory was, build a team starting with the producers and everybody that could bring, a little bit more credibility, not just experience and people who wanted to get the project done, but people that could open doors and bring some validity to the project, and that was sort of the strategy all the way along. Still is. Really.
And was that initial producing team, was that people from NYU? Was that people that you worked with kind of along the way? Kind of talk about where you found.
Yeah, you see, I mean, in that case, it wasn't because with my classmates, I was sort of like, well, those are people that are coming from the world I'm coming from. I know a lot of people that they know. I was really looking for people who, who had a couple of feature credits under their belt, who would bring, a little bit. I didn't have a feature as a writer-director, and so, and I didn't have a short in Sundance or anything, so no one was going to know who I was. So I wanted to bring some validity to the project that way, and so I just started networking around in New York with people that I had met, actually, with some casting directors. Met a producer who's now my current partner, and he introduced me to a young woman, Julie Christeas, and she read the script and loved it, and we clicked, and she had a partner, so he came on, and then I had another friend who'd been a lifelong location manager, and he was moving into producing, and so he brought this great level of experience for doing something like going to Alaska, and so it just sort of built out.
And that's interesting you mentioned, as much as schooling you had and as much work you did, you were still a first time in some categories. For the people out there who maybe did a couple shorts, who's thinking about it be a first feature, what's that conversation like? How do you convince some more experienced people to go, hey, trust me, come on my team, and I can make this happen with us as a team?
Well, I really think in some ways by saying, I am inexperienced, or this is what I understand that I don't know, and I feel that way even now. Thinking about doing a second feature, there's plenty that I don't know. And, Wildlike's one level of movie. There's obviously a lot of different other types of movies. And so I think one of the ways that I think people trust, honesty. I don't think people are really attracted to, braggadocio or someone that's got something to prove. That I see that a lot, and I think that sort of turns me off. I'm not afraid to tell you what I know and don't know. And I think if you ask someone to say, look, you obviously have to have something, an asset, whether it's a script or a talent or a belief that you can make it. But this idea of the director of like, he knows exactly what he wants and he's not going to stop until it's done, and no one can tell him, maybe that's fine for a director who's way down the road in their career. But I think when starting out, I think that's a big mistake.
Talk a little bit about building out the team a little bit more, department heads, and also a little bit of how did you get the initial fundraising? Was it investors? Was it fundraising on your own? Was it credit card?
Yeah. Well, it was all of the above. But on the building of the team side, kind of going along with what you're saying, I wanted people who were friendly and would be easy to work with, people that wanted to go to Alaska. I wanted to find people who had worked on projects that I felt were of a similar size and nature to Wildlight. Movies that I had seen or heard about, either at one of the festivals or had seen through the indie circuit. So that again, if you're choosing a cinematographer, I had a couple of great friends from NYU who I felt were really talented, and I knew them. I knew I could work with them, but I also could look around at other cinematographers who might bring some of that same experience, but also could bring some credibility, open some doors, bring on some other people who would elevate the project across the board. And so I really went for that, as you guys know, probably, I feel like the film business works a lot by who you know, and the larger you can make your network and the better, the more winners you can work with, the better chance you have of getting the project further and further down the road. So I looked for that in the cinematographer and in an editor and a production designer and so forth. And I felt like, someone's credits and seeing the work they had done on a project that I said, yeah, this is the kind of feeling I want Wildlight to have, that, there's no reason to settle for less than that. I see a lot of people say, oh, I have this great friend, he's a wonderful actor, and that's great if you want to do that. But I think it's just so hard to get your movie forward. You just got to do everything you can.
Yeah. Go for the best.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the financing.
Oh, yeah, the financing. So I started with a little bit of family money. Basically it was enough to bring a casting director on, and I took a scouting trip to Alaska, which was kind of a little bit of a rewrite trip and to find some early locations, and I'm trying to think what else. And then I guess I took a couple of trips out here to LA, just in terms of using money to build out the team and start looking at casting options, and then I started asking everybody that I knew. We put together a prospectus, a nice prospectus that had, bios, talked about the project. It was more business and less pictures. I did have a ton of pictures from Alaska, having gone there a couple of times, and we peppered a few of those in there. But really, it was sort of like, this is the project, this is the synopsis, this is how we see it. It had a nice cover page of sort of who's involved, and then it had a page about prospective cast that we wanted. People like Bruce, and then it had bios of the team, and then it had some information about how difficult the independent film world is and where the movie could possibly go. Which is really not that many options. And then and then at the end it had sort of a risk factors sheet of telling investors what a disaster it would be.
Warning them as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, because look, you're selling. To me, I think that you're selling an investment, unless you're doing like a doc and it's for a cause or something, you can bring it in a nonprofit way, or you're going through Kickstarter. You're selling an investment, but really you're selling yourself and your idea, and it's a patronized art at that level, at this level, and you have to come to some sort of terms and explanation with that. So. I luckily met a couple people who ended up investing in the movie. My producers each brought on some money, and we sort of cobbled it all together. It took about 2 years, and then and then we had a big tax credit from Alaska. I think it ended up being like 33%, and it's pretty inclusive in what counts towards that 33%. Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit about that in production. Let's talk a little about casting for our actors in the audience. When you're writing, how specific in your head are these characters, like visually, sound? Kind of talk a little bit about that, and we'll talk about then what did you meet in the audition room.
Yeah. When I'm writing, I got to a point where I felt like I had to have visuals for the characters. Yeah. Like I just needed to picture them in my mind, and so I sort of started leafing through actors and actually Bryan Cranston really came to mind really quickly, which was before Breaking Bad had broke big. But I was watching it. I had been a fan, and so he just seemed like an obvious person to just have in mind. It was really like, Nick Nolte, but like 20 years ago, So I had a group of different photos I kind of looked at and kept in a file. And was like, okay, I've got this composite idea of Bart. And then I did the same thing for Kinsey. Actually was going online, like, I was like, I need to find like pictures of like 14-year-old girls and 15-year-old girls. Same thing when I was writing the script. I was like, I really need to meet more like 14-year-old girls, really find out what they're like. I was like, that's a really bad idea. I was literally terrified of like trying to find photos of composite people to be Mackenzie. But so that's where the process started. It's just sort of having an idea of who they were. And I second guessed myself in terms of the depth of the character, saying, do I really know who this character is? And I probably think I know who they are more than they do. And I'm going to learn more about them as we go along and once it gets cast. And I think I was definitely right on that. I'm sure some writers and directors know their characters far better than I do. I don't know. I think I have a deficiency in just really being willing to sit down and say, this is who your character is, whether you like it or not. And so I kept trying to take myself through that process.
But which is interesting you say that, because I think that is an interesting process than you have with the actor. It sounds like it's more of an exploration once they're kind of on board, and it becomes a really kind of big conversation piece. Talk about the people. What was it about the actors that rang true for you? A little bit of advice for the actors in the room of like what worked in the audition room for you, whether you cast them or not. What was the actors that just kind of what worked?
Yeah, we can kind of go through all of it. Well, I knew what sort of style and feel of movie I wanted, and so I knew that I wanted to find actors that I had seen do work that was similar, that I knew could pull it off, or I'd have to see it in audition. I think I always wanted Kinsey to be a face that we wouldn't really recognize, and then Bart, I figured I would try to get the best actor that I could, and same thing with the uncle, so with Bart it was very much hired a casting director. They sent a list, and we started talking about the names and whether it was realistic or not realistic, and just sort of, and just started making offers. It was very mechanical, and I had a hard time. I'd just go through each actor and I'd be like, no, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. It's like I was very picky about it. I just didn't want someone too recognizable, but it also, we're trying to bring someone in who is, somewhat of a name. And then I really did want someone who I'd seen work in independent film in one way or another. And Bruce really was a perfect fit because, most of you probably know he got his start in Adam McGoyan's independent movies, and which are these great, beautiful art films. And now he's kind of doing independence again, doing Kelly Reichardt's movie, and he actually did another Adam McGoyan movie recently. And he does big stuff, but he also does the smaller movies, and you can find those movies and see him and perform in them and see how he can really come to life in a smaller movie. So that was that. On Mackenzie, I kind of thought, we just, like meet a girl on the subway or something, and that kind of thing. But my casting director said, no, let's go through agencies. Let's ask him for some people, and let's look at some different ideas, and we'll also do a more general casting call. And I had a lot of videos that came in from various girls, some through agencies and agents, and some just I think through like Backstage and places like that. And I took a trip out here to meet a handful of people and to meet with CAA and WME and UTA and just get some covering agents to offer up some ideas. And, and I saw some girls who clearly were talented and had, experience, but, the TV shows and movies that they'd been in were nothing like what I was trying to make. And so it didn't help determine if they were the right people are not, and just something wasn't clicking. And I actually went back to my hotel room here, and I was like, oh, I'm, exhausted, and I turned on demand, and I turned on that movie, Never Let Me Go, British film, and Ella Purnell is in that movie. She plays a young version of Keira Knightley in that movie, and I saw her on TV for all of 5 minutes, and I was like, that's her, And actually, I wasn't looking for someone really pretty. I was actually looking for someone that's very plain looking, but Ella just has this, sort of amazing presence and stare and silence, which she also has in Never Let Me Go, and I just felt like that's what I needed. I knew the character didn't speak much and had to carry something through with her eyes, especially, and turns out she was British, but I had met with her agent at UTA that day by chance, and I literally called the agent like at 11 o'clock at night and was like, you gotta introduce me to this girl here, and they were, and we got in touch with them. They did a video audition, sent it over. I wasn't totally thrilled with the video audition, but something inside of me was just still saying like, this is the right person. And I went to London and I met with her and her mom. We kind of covered the topic of sexual abuse and told them what I wanted to do with the movie and how I wanted to cover those scenes, and we did a little bit of reading and talking, and I really liked them as people, her and her mom, and so that made me feel like it was more her. And then as we got closer to shooting, Ella and I did some Skype rehearsals, and I would send her materials and so forth. And anyway, my point is to say that she would do more performance work and rehearsals and so forth, and I still didn't feel like she was quite there. And I really tried as a director to give her notes there in video Skype and over email and say, look, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, this is what I'm looking for. We talked about other films, books, other materials, photos, anything I could do to just sort of give her a creative image of what I wanted to come to. And then when the camera went up on the first day, it was like, she had absorbed what I had given her, and she had listened, and it was amazing.
How long was that process before the first day of shooting for her to absorb it and you guys to interact and everything?
Well, we did do 2 days of rehearsal, and I really felt like she was coming around. That was 2 days of rehearsal in Alaska right before we started shooting, and definitely felt like, I felt good about it. But I wasn't wowed until literally the first day of shooting, and we started capturing her on camera. And she had come onto the project maybe a year and a half to 2 years before we shot. So she was really the first one on board.
Nice.
Yeah. And then Brian I had lunch with, agents recommended him. I actually didn't know who he was. I'd seen Hurt Locker, but I didn't realize who he was, and had a great lunch with him. He's got a real energy and a real sort of naturalness about him, and the more I looked at the material he'd been in, I felt like he was a good candidate. And we did look at other actors, but eventually came back around to him, and he was still interested, and so we just sort of sealed the deal.
Nice.
And then Ann Dowd and Nolan Funk, who plays Tommy, they came in for auditions. My casting director set up auditions, and I had no idea who I was going to be seeing or anything. And some actors that I recognized came in, and frankly, I was a little bit surprised. And Ann came in, and she really nailed it. I mean, she's such a good actor. But not only did she nail it, but I said, okay, that's great. I said, now give it to me like this. And I sort of changed the character and asked her to do it in a way that was completely different than the way I described it to her, in notes and before she did it, and she was able to do that. And so it's like, not only is she great, but she listens, she takes directions, and she's willing to try to find it. And Nolan, he gave basically the same performance that he gives there in the audition. It's amazing because I don't know how old he is now. He's got to be like 30, but you meet him and he's just, he's very fit, he's like a, Gucci model or something. And, but he came in the audition and he was like, oh my God, this guy's 19. He's like becoming 19 right in front of my eyes. And he had not hadn't had a chance to do some things like that. So in this case, he was someone that I wouldn't have seen in an independent film. You know, he was on, I don't know, some show on WB or something, and he was like in X2 and some horror movies, and but he came in and showed his stuff. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about production. How many days were you shooting up in Alaska? How many days were you up there kind of prepping before?
Yeah. So the whole Alaska experience, I first went there in 2003 on a backpacking trip in Denali, going to some of the exact same locations that they're in the movie. And that's where that's where I saw it as first of like this amazing geographical wonder that would be a great place for a story. So it was sort of lodged in my mind. And then I wrote Wild Like. And then I went back in 2010 and sort of took Mackenzie's journey. I started in Juneau, got on the boat, went up to Whittier, went up to Denali, then drove around through southeast Alaska back and sort of verified, okay, this is what she could actually do. And met some people along the way, met some location owners, and got some new ideas, rewrote a little bit of the script. So Alaska was in my mind, and then once my producer Julie came on, I said, let's go back to Alaska. I've got to show you, what's going on, and we can do some pre-production work and so forth. So we did that, and we were going to try to shoot the summer of 2011, and we just didn't have the money together. We just weren't ready. Had a lot of it, but not all of it, and so, so we went back again. Instead of shooting, we said, let's go back on another scouting trip. We brought another producer along with us, did sort of the same thing again, and just got, made further networks into locations, G&E stuff, transportation, some money, all those sorts of things, sponsorships, anything you can do to further the process. Spent about 10 days there, and then the next summer in 2012, we decided we would shoot starting in August. The season in Alaska is obviously short, and it's driest in August because it takes a while for all the snow melt and the glacial melt to kind of dry on the roads and everything. So we decided August was the time to shoot, and we could run into September. We planned it, I think, originally as a 27-day shoot. By the time we finished pre-production, it was a 30-day shoot, and we added 1 day during production, so it became a 31 shooting days that were sort of scattered across 5 weeks. It's Alaska, so it was the summer, so the weekends didn't really make a difference. So it was more like shoot 4 days, take a day off. Yeah. Shoot 3 days, take a day off, that kind of staggering. And we started pre-production in New York, just all kind of sitting together on our computers, getting everything done that we could for about a month and a half, I think April. And then we went up to Alaska in June. So we were there for a couple of months. Stayed at housing of the University of Alaska, that they weren't using because it was summer, which was ideal.
I imagine being in Alaska and in the terrain that you guys were in, you have a lot of stories of things that maybe didn't go quite as planned as you guys could.
It actually went pretty smoothly. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. So talk a little bit about that, of maybe like planning for that, and how does and just the planning.
See, I would
process.
much rather make a movie in Alaska than in New York or LA, right? It's like, New York's a complete pain if you've never shot there. It's tight, so crowded, it's expensive. Everywhere you go, they've seen it before, they really don't want it. Where in Alaska, they're very excited for you to be there. So big community support? Yeah, big community support. There's tons of space. You just can't run out of space. They want people in Alaska, You are competing with the tourism, but as you get into later August, the tourism season dies dramatically. So that was also in our benefit. We were worried about rain. We were worried about, it doesn't really get too cold in the summer. It can turn, but we ended up getting really lucky, and it really only rained on the 1 day where we shot in the rain. Yeah. We shouldn't have that many problems. We did have amazing. We had a couple of, we were in Denali National Park, and and a bear comes within like a quarter mile kind of walking, and we were with a ranger, and he's like, well, you got to get back on the bus because I can't have wildlife be affected by seeing you, smelling you, being here. So we'd have to wait for 30 minutes. And that did happen. That happened twice during the shoot.
And you guys had longer days being up in Alaska, light-wise and everything like that.
We did. Yeah, that was of benefit. Yeah, I mean, we are here at SAG, but I'll just say Ella's British, so she's not in SAG. So, I mean, there are laws that we had to follow, but we didn't have SAG rules for Ella, who was 15 at the time. She had her mom, and we had an Alaska state tutor. The state sort of has imposed rules, and the studio teacher goes on the shoot with you. In our case, literally lived with us for 5 weeks, and so Ella's mom and the studio tutor sort of work out with the AD. Okay, this is when she can work, this is when she can't, and so forth, and they worked all that out. We had a lot of scenery to shoot too. A lot of driving to do and a lot of scenery to shoot. And we covered 3,000 miles during the shooting, so we were driving a lot. Yeah.
Talk a little bit as we get into post-production. Some filmmakers have editors on set or start editing some copy. Obviously, you were in Alaska, so I'm guessing your editor wasn't in Alaska. So did you shoot everything and then start that editing process? Talk a little bit about that.
We talked about her coming up. I mean, Anchorage is a pretty cosmopolitan place. They have a Starbucks or several. They have a Walmart, Target. Do they have? I think they have an Apple store. I can't remember now. That's the real test, right?
Yeah.
We talked about her coming up. She was here in LA, and we decided that the best thing to do, we were shooting film, and coincidentally we found that one of the best independent film labs was in Seattle. It's not there any longer, unfortunately, Alpha Cine, and they had done the processing for like Beast of the Southern Wild and a lot of really wonderful indies that looked great, and so we trusted them. And so the plan was to take the footage from wherever it was in Alaska, drive it to the Anchorage airport, which was going to be either 20 minutes or like 3 days, and then ship it overnight to Alpha Cine, who would process it. A guy in Seattle who was just a part-time hire would go over to Alpha Cine, plug it into the computer, put it on a hard drive, and then ship it down here to Mako, who's the editor, and she would start working on it. And so she was getting footage, more than once a week, but not much more than that. So by the time we finished shooting, she had almost everything, and then she came to New York, and she had an assembly together in about 3 weeks. Did that answer the question? I forgot what the question was.
The more thing was, the relationship is interesting because sometimes a filmmaker and editor can then go, oh, it would be really helpful if you go and shoot this, or I really need a cover here.
Right.
Or
yeah.
Did that happen, or was it you had it all planned out and you were just shipping it?
I'll tell you what did happen, which was helpful. One of the reasons I chose Mako as editor, because I just felt like she was so smart. Japanese woman, grew up partly in Japan and partly here, edited a bunch of great shows and movies, and so I sent her the script, and I said, from an editor standpoint, just go through and give me your unbridled notes, and she did. And so that was one of the rewrites before we started shooting. She would say, like, you got to look at this transition, or you just don't need this scene, and so forth. And that was, I think we cut out a lot of the, not the fat, but we were able to recognize some problems that we might have run into in the editing room that way.
Great.
Yeah. And we were able to look at dailies like a week late. It didn't really, not much we could do about it. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about post-production, but specifically, your film festival journey has been crazy. For those who don't know, I wrote it down because I knew I'd forget it. They've been invited to over 125 festivals, and this is old information. Won 60 awards and 28 Best Film Awards. You can give him a hand.
Thanks.
One, correct me because those numbers are wrong, but two, that's just insane. There has to be a Guinness Book of World Records somewhere, as we talked about. But that's something you can't plan. So just talk about what the feedback you got on it, and what was surprising, or what was interesting, or what was just worthy to share?
Well, to be completely honest, I mean, you know, the dream was to, you know, go to Toronto or go to Sundance, launch the movie there, sell it at the festival, and never hear about it ever again, right? I mean,
You're done.
That's the plan. It's a very unrealistic plan. Happens to somebody. And actually, things were going really well. You know, we got into post. We edited for a good while. We edited for like 3 or 4 months. You know, we had a free space we could use. Mako was really generous with her time. All the editors were there. I mean, all the producers were there often. So we had a really thorough edit. We did a lot of test screenings. And early on, when we had an early rough cut, we showed it to Christine Vachon, who we met through our lawyer, and she really liked the movie, and she and Killer Films wanted to come on and help kind of just get it further down the road and make it the best it could be, and we were really looking for sort of that seal of approval. And then Christine brought on a sales agent, Kevin Iwashina, and so, you know, I'd known who Kevin was and had a good reputation, and so things were just going so well. You know, and we were having these meetings with Kevin and Christine, and they said, well, we got to start talking to Toronto because, you know, it should get in. And we were all so excited about the possibilities. And, you know, went through Toronto. It was a very long process. Didn't get in there. Went through the same thing with Sundance. Very long process of talking to them a lot. Didn't get in there. The same thing with South by Southwest and Tribeca. So there was a lot of like, I mean, this was a dark period for me, and my wife was really not happy. But the thing that was interesting is that I was happy with the film. You know, I knew that I had, for the most part, made the movie I really wanted to make. And Christine kept saying, you know, it's going to find its place, and you just have to believe that. And I think that's true. And it's silly to get hung up on. You know, it would have been wonderful if we had been at Sundance, but if we'd been at Sundance, would I have worked as hard at everything that's happened over the last year? Definitely not, you know. And as I was saying earlier on, it's definitely better to go through a humbling process where you're forced to learn, you know, before you have a super successful process. I mean, I made 12 shorts before I made Wildlike, you know, and, you know, none of those were any sort of glaring success. So, I mean, that was a lot of learning experiences, which I think was the same. So, you know, by the time we got around to sort of spreading it out a little more with talking to a few festivals at a time, Hamptons said they wanted to world premiere it, and a couple other festivals did, and we felt like Hamptons was a good place to do it. Some of our investors, you know, had relations to the Hamptons, and we were in New York. It just seemed like the right fit, and I guess I had this sort of like it was just probably like greed and ego. I was like, well, I'm just going to start talking to a lot of other festivals, and maybe the strategy should be to go to a lot of festivals, and maybe, you know, maybe there's, you know, other people that will appreciate the movie in the way that the, you know, first few programmers didn't, and I guess that sort of turned out to be correct. And
well, it's interesting too because you could have, for lack of a better term, given up after the big ones, but you're like, no, I'm going to keep going.
yeah, I mean, what are you going to do?
But that's the point. Is like I think that's the stories. You were forced to keep going, and the learning process seemed so much more beneficial on this side of it for you. Can you talk about maybe a couple things where like you felt like, okay, this is stuff?
Well, it is. I think it is because, I mean, if it had gone, let's just say if it had gone to South by and we had gone there, and what if it had sold at the festival, you know, maybe not for a lot of money, then I wouldn't have. What would I have learned? I mean, you know, I would have learned about that process, but that's that's nothing compared to having to, you know, do a dog and pony show around the country at, you know, dozens of festivals and go through that process. I mean, at first we were relying on our sales agents to reach out to festivals, and then I sort of started thinking, you know, this came around with Hamptons. Julie was like, I'm just going to email David, and he responded to that. And then I had the thought, well, I'm just going to email, you know, this other festival. And then we just started emailing festivals directly and saying, look, we've got this movie. It's going to open at Hamptons. We had a little 1-minute trailer that we had cut together. It was just a very basic thing, just to give them an idea of what it looked like. And you know, and they started responding. And I just started literally collecting list and list of festivals to reach out to, and it just started growing and growing. I now have this massive spreadsheet of, festivals, and there are a lot of places that turned it down. There's a lot of festivals out there, and a lot of really small festivals that ended up being some of the best places to play at because the community's strong, they're excited to have you, and, you meet a lot of wonderful people. It's been a fantastic process meeting other filmmakers. We were talking about Gone Doggy Gone, and I met Casey Brown at San Luis Obispo Film Festival, and we hit it off, and we started talking festivals, and then, she recommended me to Edmonton Film Festival, and then she was like, you got to go to Julian Dubuque Film Festival in Iowa, right? It's like, what? And I went there. It's one of the best festivals. It's the greatest. This little town of Dubuque, Iowa, and they set up little screenings in different shops and stores up and down Main Street. The community's all involved. They treat the filmmakers really well. They put you up, and it's a great community, and it was like one of my top 5 festivals.
And it's interesting because I feel this ties right back into what you were saying in the beginning of the Q&A about building out that network. And by doing it this way, you've met so many more people than if you would have just done 1 or 2 festivals, sold it, and moved on.
Yeah, well, the other thing that we started doing is we started bringing around a notebook to the Q&As and to the screenings and saying, hey, if you want to know more about when we're going to come out and when it's going to be released, we write your email down, and now we have like 5,000 names on a newsletter that that actually want to know about when the movie comes out.
And not only this movie, but the next project, and it's just you build.
Hopefully, yeah.
So perfect segue. Kind of talk about what's the continuation of this film. When's your opening?
Yeah.
What other places are you?
Well,
going?
so Hamptons is the kind of place where distributors are going to descend and watch it and buy it. So Kevin and his team at the company Preferred Content, they started sending a link to all the distributors they know and sort of saying, this is what's going on. And some reviews, some festivals reviews had started to come out, which were really, really positive. We'd started to win some awards. And they all take a look at it, and they would write back with really positive things to say, except they would say, look, you've got sexual abuse in the first 20 minutes of your movie. Bruce Greenwood is a big name, but he's not, that big of a name. And, and they're like, well, we'll think about it. And, so we just kind of went down the list, getting turned down from distributor after distributor. And then we ended up with about 4 or 5 who were interested in the movie, and, they wanted to put it in theaters, and they believed in it. And then we actually had another one that wanted to do what's called a service deal. If you guys don't know this, it's, a regular distribution deal is where they just come in and they say, I'll either give you, $100,000 to buy the U.S. rights, all the U.S. rights, and I do whatever I want with it, and then we share, 60, 40, 80, 20 on the back end, or I give you 0 money down, and and we share 50-50, which is what happens most of the time with small indies. Where in a service deal, you're really hiring the distributor, you're paying them to agree to distribute the movie. And then you guys are splitting the profits, but the profits are much more like 80 in your favor and 20 in theirs. There's a couple of disadvantages to it, but there's really a lot of advantages to that deal because you control the movie yourself, and you get to say, yes, I like the trailer, I don't like the trailer. No, I don't like the poster. Yes, this is what I want to do with the distribution. It's all mutually agreed upon about how the movie comes out. So we... kind of like with the festival thing, I just felt like controlling the process and having an opportunity to take our own risk was the best way to go. And so, we have a great service deal, and it's going to come to, I think it's going to be like 20 cities on September 25th. A few in Alaska. We've actually got a Canadian distributor who's going to put it in 2 or 3 cities in Canada, and then, out here, LA, New York, Chicago, and some various places, Seattle, Portland, Salt Lake, some places Denver, some places you might figure Wild Lake might go to. And then it's day and date, so it's going to come out online and on demand all at the same time. And we raised a little bit of, advertising money to put towards the release. and the reviews have been great. So we just, we hope for the best.
We always wrap up with the kind of golden nugget question of,
I don't know.
you talked a lot and shared a lot of great information, but if you could just go back as a director, as a writer, as a producer, however you want to answer it, and go, if you could only remember one thing of our conversation as they are thinking about making their own project, whether it be a short or feature, what would you want them to remember as they start their own project?
I've been really big about just being very thorough and organized and doing everything you possibly can on all fronts. I mean, as a director, I think you really, if you're a small independent director just starting out, you really have to be a producer. And no one's going to care about your project like you do. And, like I said, it's, don't just hire an editor. Look at the editor as an opportunity to further the project, and look at the location. It's like, yeah, I mean, I could have put Wildlight, somewhere in the lower 48, but I saw Alaska and, as an opportunity. And frankly, I think we had just as easy of a shoot there as we could have in New York. So, I think a small film, it just needs everything it can. Now, that said, on a short, you can overreach. But I think that's more of a story point. You could also say, hey, I'm going to go to, I'm going to drive across the border down to the coast of Mexico and shoot a short down there. Why not? Why shoot it in LA if you can just drive 3 hours south and shoot somewhere people don't see shorts that often? So I think you bring something new to the screen and work hard to always second guess yourself, and there's got to be some way to move the project forward, not just creatively, but from the business standpoint also.
I think that's a great place to end. Let's give them a hand and say thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.